A bright tent in a high meadow. Meeting place for ideas. Aspen.
Long before anyone set foot here, nature marked this valley as a place of constant movement. The tectonic force of two plates colliding formed the mountains that rise above us, and the roaring Fork River met with its tributaries to carve out the valley below. When the Ute tribe arrived, they hunted and gathered across the land. When silver was found, miners drove their pickaxes through rock and earth in search of the precious metal. And in the years-long fog that followed 2 world wars, a movement began here to take a humanistic approach to addressing the world's pressing problems.
At the end of that convocation, a petition was passed around urging that this may not be allowed to die with one summer, but that there would be a continuing summer activity of an educational and cultural sort. And therefore, the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies was founded in the fall of 1949.
We gather in that same valley today as a confluence of backgrounds, experiences, and ideas, moving together as one in pursuit of a shared goal, the betterment of humanity. For 75 years, the Aspen Institute has been committed to that shared goal. With thousands of fellows around the globe, dozens of policy programs and executive seminars, and 13 international partners across 5 continents, the Aspen Institute is a waypoint on the road to progress for forward-looking people that want to make a difference in the world.
When they founded the Aspen Institute, they did so based on the principle that if all of us deeply understood and appreciated the common values that we shared, we would be able to find common ground in facing both the global challenges and our domestic problems at home.
Since its inception, the Aspen Ideas Festival has been carrying on the tradition of what came before it, with some of the world's most influential leaders, thinkers, and artists coming together in this hallowed valley to discuss the issues of today with a bright eye on tomorrow.
Well, I can't think of any place on earth where as interesting and provocative a collection of people could be gathered under one hospitable roof. The Aspen Institute has come to fill in this important void, and if it didn't exist, it would have to be invented.
Progress is hard, and lasting progress can seem elusive. But here we are anyway, finding commonality amidst differing perspectives, working through our differences in hope of creating a better, more beautiful world for the next generation. Welcome to the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival. We begin our proceedings with a note of remembrance. Today, we mourn the passing of an eminent public man who lived an iconic American life, our longtime Aspen Institute trustee, Leonard Lauder. A titan of business, a shaper of culture, a patron of the arts, a consequential philanthropist, a student of human nature, and a true believer in democracy, Leonard enhanced everything he touched. He first came to Aspen in 1978 and quickly joined the Aspen Institute's Board of Trustees in 1980, where he was a pillar of strength and of great ideas. He was a champion of all of our work, especially the executive seminar, our international partners, our development of this beautiful campus, and we will miss him dearly. If you're in town later this summer, we invite you all to join us for a celebration of life that will be held right in this tent on August 6th at 5 o'clock to commemorate Leonard's life and legacy. To Leonard's family and loved ones, including his son Gary and Laura, who join us for this festival, we extend our deepest sympathies and condolences. So, as we open our festival now, let us acknowledge the many who are making all of this possible. First, thank you to our trustees, especially our board chair, Margot Pritzker, joined here with her husband, Tom. Thank you, Margot. Thank you to our underwriters, our partners, our supporters, and our more than 170 patron pass holders. Join me in thanking them, please. Thank you to our speakers, our fellows, our staff and their families, our interns, our volunteers, all led by Executive Vice President Jin-Hee Kim and Festival Executive Producer Graham Veazey. Thank you all. A special thank you to the energetic teams of high school leaders brought here by Mike and Jackie Bezos, this year's Aspen Challenge and Bezos Scholars. Woo. They are in the house for sure. A big thank you to our 2025 guest curator and author and thinker who ranges seamlessly from economics to history to global security, the one and only Fareed Zakaria. Thank you, Fareed. This year's festival takes on added meaning because we are celebrating 75 years of service by the Aspen Institute. It all began in 1949 when Walter and Elizabeth Pepke convened 2,000 leaders beneath these mountains for a 3-week summit on the future of humanism. They convened knowing that the world had reached an inflection point. The Soviet Union was expanding. Communism had taken over China. The Cold War had begun, and nuclear technology was proliferating. The absolute evil of the Holocaust was both a living trauma and a chilling warning about human nature that must never be forgotten. In the post-war world, America's role and the role of the West would be crucial for global peace. But what would hold the West together in dizzying times? For our founders, the answer was humanistic optimism and a practical commitment to open-minded collaboration needed to sustain free, just, equitable, and functioning societies. That vision launched the Aspen Institute, and with it, the Aspen Music Festival and School and the Aspen Center for Physics. Across 75 years now of changes and challenges at home and abroad, we've steadfastly worked to ignite human potential, to build understanding, and promote new possibilities for a better world. It's a calling that was propelled forward at warp speed by our 13th president and CEO, my good friend Walter Isaacson, who joins us today with his wife, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy and Walter. And part of celebrating 75 is celebrating this institute's many founding voices and influences. We'll have time for more. One of the most important was the Bauhaus pioneer Herbert Bayer, who designed this campus from the 1950s through the 1970s as a total work of art and was featured in that very first conversation held here in 1949. And so, as we begin this evening, I would like to share some exciting news. In 2022, powered by the vision and philanthropy of Linda and Stuart Resnick, we inaugurated the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, which is a gem of a museum located just that way on campus, and with it, a new campus entrance to signal for all how open we are to our neighbors in the greater Aspen community. The center honors Herbert's artistic achievements and testifies, as our founders knew, to the power of design and creativity to stimulate civic imagination. While you're here, I urge you to visit our breathtaking exhibition space and learn from our executive director, Lissa Ballinger, and her staff. You are in for a delight. Well, today, we are proud to announce, as we celebrate our 75th anniversary, that to grow the endowment of the Beyer Center, Linda and Stuart have made a new investment of $10 million. This donation brings the Resnick's lifetime support to this institute and our mission and work in the world to more than $46 million. Wow. Now let's take a moment to celebrate this donation and the extraordinary philanthropists who made it.
Linda, she is sort of the godmother of this place, guiding us and hosting us and welcoming us since I've been coming here.
I'm honored and pleased to say a few words about Linda Resnick. She is my friend, she is my colleague, she is the emergency contact on my Soul Cycle membership.
What motivated you to start doing all of this?
I realized that that is my obligation as a human being on this planet to give back as much as I can.
Linda Resnick, she's a good nut. Just look what she's accomplished.
Linda and Stuart Resnick.
I know how committed you are to the communities in Lost Hills and throughout the Central Valley. Maybe 1 in 10 million could have even thought of it, but you did.
I had an epiphany right here at the Aspen Institute. I think my epiphanies always happen at the Aspen Institute. It's just the way it goes here.
Linda and Stuart Resnick are champions as we have sought over the years to present to our many publics the aesthetic heritage that is this institute, led by, of course, the brilliant Herbert Beyer.
And I was absolutely amazed at the masterpiece he created in Aspen.
She's just glows every time she gets to talk about this, so I encourage you to do more of it in public.
Thank you, Dad.
Linda Resnick.
Now, as we carry forward this spirit of generosity and creativity, let us open the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival with a conversation that sets the tone for the days ahead. We come together at an inflection point, in some ways like the one of our founding 75 years ago. None of us can say right now how 20 months of widening war in the Middle East will be resolved. But we must hope and pray for the well-being of all civilians and, of course, for the brave women and men who serve in and support America's military. Nor can we say how today's challenges and changes in the United States will be resolved, with so many debates and disputes in the Congress, the courts, and the public commons. These confusing times make our work right here that much more important. We thank you for taking part in the respectful and freewheeling dialogue for which we are known. So, to kick things off, our first speakers, Walter Isaacson and Fareed Zakaria, will explore the complexity of our current moment. Welcome to the stage.
Walter Isaacson was the editor of Time magazine, also the chairman and CEO of this company, CNN. Walter, what do you think Obama needs to do to make a mark in foreign policy? Walter Isaacson has written fascinating best-selling biographies of Albert Einstein, Benjamin Franklin, and Henry Kissinger. What do they have in common? He is the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. Walter, thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you, Fareed.
Let's first talk about the America that produces Steve Jobs. Walter Isaacson once ran CNN, but he is now the CEO of the Aspen Institute. Walter Isaacson's just written a book about it called The Innovators. Joining me now are some smart strategists, big thinkers, and brilliant historians. Walter Isaacson has now written a beautiful book about the original Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci. Now he sets his sight on modern-day wonders of science in The Codebreaker. His new book is titled simply Elon Musk. I am going to hand over the show to my dear friend, the great writer Walter Isaacson.
It was embarrassing. You didn't tell me when you asked me to do this you were going to embarrass me. Yes, we have a product placement deal with Palm Wonderful because of what was just announced. So thank you. Wow. You know, as Dan said, 75 years ago, this institute was founded in almost the big bang of great institutes coming out of the World War II, some governmental like those coming out of Bretton Woods, and this one dedicated to the concept of liberal Western democracy or liberal democracy. You've written 2 recent books that are almost must-reads for the situation we're in now. The Age of Revolution was the most recent, The Future of Freedom before that, and both of them take on the challenges that liberal democracies are facing. And in some ways, you set up the framework of being those who are kind of open versus closed, not left, right, other things. Explain that framing of the world and what we're facing now.
Sure. I mean, I think the big shift that's taken place is that we've moved from a world where politics was defined by left versus right. And the left versus right was simple. It was, do you believe in more state or less state in the economy? You know, so on the left, people wanted more taxes, more regulation, more redistribution. And on the right, people wanted less taxes, less regulation, less redistribution. That dynamic was the 20th century. And whether you were in India, where I grew up, whether you were in the United States, you could say somebody was left-wing and right-wing, and that would make sense. And you could predict how someone would vote. People, generally speaking, who were blue-collar and made less than the median wage, voted left of center. And people who were white-collar and voted and made more than the median wage were right of center. Today, it's all scrambled up, right? Working-class people are more likely to vote for Donald Trump's Republican Party. Affluent professionals are more likely to vote for the Democratic Party. Why? Because what has happened is that that dynamic ran its course. And we are now in a genuinely post-industrial world where the big divide is really, do you want a kind of open world, a world of immigration, diversity, multiculturalism, fast-moving technology?
Free trade.
Free trade. Or do you look at that world and say, stop the train, I want to get off? Or at least slow down the train, it's moving too fast. And generally speaking, what we are going through now is a kind of backlash to 30 years of unbelievable, accelerated movement. You know, think about the explosion of globalization after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Think of the information revolution, which creates a whole new economy. Think of the cultural revolution that we've gone through. I mean, think about the change in the role of women in the last 30 or 40 years. You know, and that's something that stayed the same in mostly every human society for like 30,000 years. Yeah. And now it, you know, in the last 50. So think about the magnitude of all those changes. And the point of, you know, the book in some ways was, when you have that kind of accelerated change, don't be surprised if you get a backlash.
Okay, well, let me backlash for a moment on you, which is, you are the exemplar, and I'm close behind, at being part of what I'll call the Davos, Washington, Aspen consensus. That was all in favor of that openness that you talked about. We were in favor of free trade, free movements of people. We thought immigration was a good thing. Diversity was a good thing. A lot of people got left behind by that globalization. Were we wrong?
So it's a very good question, because I think that in some places we did go too far too fast. I think of immigration as the one, and honestly, I've talked about this and written about it for a long time. There's only so much of that kind of change that a society can take at one time. In 1975, about 5% of Americans were foreign-born. About 15% are foreign-born today. It's not the highest it's ever been. It was higher in the 1890s, but remember, there was a huge backlash. We had those nationalist quotas set up in 1924, which essentially shut down immigration. So immigration, clearly we went too fast, too far. On something like trade...
Wait, let's put a fine point on immigration, because historically, that 15% is a tipping point.
Yeah.
Whether it was in the 1840s with the Irish immigration, you get another. And I started work in England as a journalist when the immigration hit 15% there, and you got Enoch Powell.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we have learned from history that this notion of allowing more and more people in when we hit that number was going to be causing a backlash?
You know, we should have, and partly because immigration functions as a kind of symbol, a stand-in for all these changes. Because, you know, how do you see the global movement of capital, which has accelerated dramatically over the last 40 or 50 years? How do you see even the expansion of trade? Unless you go to the port of Los Angeles and see those containers, you're not going to realize. But one thing you can see and feel is when you hear of or see people who look different, who sound different, who speak a different language, who worship a different God, and they come, and then you begin to say to yourself, my world is disappearing. You know, this is one of the things Tony Blair once said to me, which I thought was very smart, was when people feel deep anxiety, their tendency is not to move left economically, but to move right culturally.
Is that what's happened with the populist backlash?
I think so. Think about it, right? Like the left, one of the fascinating things about this populist backlash is the left everywhere is in ruins. Look at Europe. France, the left, which used to be a huge dominant part, destroyed. Germany, the left is destroyed. Italy, the left is destroyed. The northern countries, Britain is slightly different for peculiar reasons, but in general, the left is finding it difficult.
Well, wait, do you think Brexit was part of that backlash?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in a sense, you know, the right has always known how to play the politics of nostalgia better than the left. Because the left is about, you know, forward movement. But the right is about taking you back to the Garden of Eden. You know, the most important words on Donald Trump's cap is again. Yeah. Make America great again. Because everyone has this mystical moment. Nikki Haley tweeted at one point, wasn't life wonderful when we were kids and we had no troubles and it was all so great? And I sort of did the math, and she grew up kind of in the mid-70s. The mid-70s are when the United States lost its first war, you know, humiliating, defeat in Vietnam. The president of the United States was impeached because he was being on the verge of being, convicted of high crimes and misdemeanors. We had something so bad economically that we had to come up with a new name for it, stagnation plus inflation, which became called stagflation, and the price of oil quadrupled in 2 years. That was the halcyon days that she talked about. You know, I think it's actually an evolutionary response. We remember the good stuff. We don't remember the bad stuff.
But you just framed this as left-right, and you said the left is in shambles. But I read your book, and that's not the framing we need in a way. We've even seen in the New York City mayor's race yesterday that sometimes the far left and the far right have the same populist tendencies.
Yeah, that's a great point, because they're both opposed to the elite, to the Davos, to you and me.
And everybody here.
And pretty much everyone here.
Yeah.
And part of that is, I think, a sense that we ended up, part of the other thing that happened over the last 30 years is we created a new meritocratic elite. I mean, you are, a standard bearer of it in a sense, because you really, succeeded at every spot on that meritocratic ladder. Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, Time Magazine, which was one of the...
By the way, I did meet you when you were at Harvard on that ladder. So we go way back on that ladder.
All right. So a small interjection, if I may. This is how I met Walter Isaacson. This is a true story. I was a graduate student at Harvard. I had just arrived there, and I had written my first published piece, which was a review in an obscure magazine, the Phi Beta Kappa magazine called The American Scholar. And I was very proud. It's the first time I'd been published. And in those days, magazines mattered. And I met this club at Harvard called the Signet Society for kind of undergraduate literary types.
The elite.
And
this is a cocktail hour or something like that, and there's a couple of old alums there. And this guy starts chatting with me, and he says, what are you doing? And this, that, and the other. And I said, I'm a graduate student, but I also try to write on the side. I'm interested in journalism. And he said, oh, really? What have you written? I said, well, I just wrote a review of Walter Isaacson's book, The Wise Men. Do you know it? And you can imagine his response. I've never felt so embarrassed in my life.
Sense. Then thanks for the review. It was like Evan wrote the good part.
It wasn't very good. Yeah. So anyway, so we created this world of Walter Isaacson's, and it is, it's a much better system than we had before. How did you create the elite before? You had to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. You had to have gone to the right schools. You had to have come from the right families. You had to, that was basically how you got into places like Harvard, Yale. You went to Exeter or Andover. Why did you go to Exeter or Andover? Because your family had gone there. So now it became more about tests and exams and essays and recommendations and how good are you at sports. But what we forgot is it's still an elite. And it still leaves a lot of people behind. And I would argue that we have all forgotten that there is still an enormous act of inclusion that needs to take place. Because I think a meritocratic elite almost thinks that they deserve it. And so, in a strange sense, the people who didn't succeed also deserve their fate, right? The person who got his job because daddy got him the call, and he went to the right schools, maybe has a little bit more of a sense that, this is like a very lucky situation, and I should have a sense of noblesse oblige toward others. But somebody who worked their butt off and got the right scores, they think, look, I climbed my way up. Other people can do it. But that's not the right way to see. So I think we created a much bigger divide, and then you add to it a post-industrial society where you really have transformed the rewards to education and skills. In the world you were growing up in, Walter, less so mine, you can make a very good living working with your hands. Today, you really can't. You make a good living working with your head, with your mind. We've all become, Robert Reich had this wonderful phrase, symbolic analysts. If we manipulate code, symbols, words, images, stories, and that's every lawyer, consultant, banker, hedge fund manager, that's all, you're all symbolic analysts. You're doing well. If you're manipulating physical objects for work, you're not. Because somebody in China can do it at 10 cents on the dollar, or more likely, software can do it, right? And that divide means the people who are in this elite, the returns have gotten way, way bigger. And, we're in a much different situation. Now, I want to turn the tables on you, though, and ask you a little bit about how you see all this from the perspective of somebody who left New Orleans and then went on this journey. And as I say, succeeded at the absolutely highest levels, but always kept a foot in New Orleans. And then after the hurricane, you went back and you tried to do something about it.
Well, the meritocratic elite was sort of invented by James Bryant Conant with SAT tests, and Harvard no longer doing mainly legacy admissions, but saying, okay, if wherever you're from, if you score high. So I was part of that. I got tapped because I was down there in New Orleans, and I got to go on this journey. And you're right, it took us on a journey of people who were a little bit, as Michael Sandel has pointed out, he's a great philosopher of this, who thought somehow we deserved all this, instead of the most important thing in life, which is to wake up every morning and saying, I'm the luckiest camper around. That I'm thankful and have gratitude for the things that have happened. So, all right. Well, wait, yes. Then what happened after Katrina is I realized that the things that meant the most to me were community and sort of the cradle from which I had all this luck, this gratitude. And so my city was threatened, and I went back home. Kathy and I split our time now between New Orleans and New York, because I think it's important in this age of sort of populist discombobulation to know your roots, to figure out what is it you care for. It doesn't have to be the roots of the town where you were born, but what values are you rooted in? What do you care about? I remember being with Steve Jobs at the very end of his life, and I said, what was it all about? And he said, well, my guru in India told me that life is like a river. And if you're part of the, meritocratic elite, not the word he used, you got to pull things out of the river. Great ideas people had put in, great products. He said, now I realize it's not what you get to pull out of the river, but what you get to put into the river. And that means going back to the source of all the things you've gotten, which is why I think a lot of people here at Aspen now.
Do you think it's possible to recreate those communities that because people left those communities because they had opportunities, they wanted jobs, they wanted, can you put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
The reason I think I'll say I, have been wrong about a lot of things is I thought tariffs were a really bad idea. I don't think they're the world's greatest idea, but I saw that free trade started hollowing out communities. Bogalusa, Louisiana, where my mother was from, used to have textile and lumber and other things totally decimated. People started losing jobs because there was not the free trade that we had in America got us so we could buy a flat-screen TV set at Walmart on a Sunday night really cheap, but you couldn't catch the early morning bus on Monday to go to a good job at a good wage. And so the question is how you put that back together. So part of my rethinking of, my beliefs is maybe we should do more to encourage jobs in America. I know we somewhat disagree on this. You do not believe that there can be much more manufacturing in America. My belief is that the dignity of having a job like that, even if you're not part of the meritocratic elite, but you got a good job to go to, that is much more important than the growth of the economy or overall wealth. So how do we put that back together? And I see it arising in communities around this country. From Chattanooga to Columbus, Ohio, hopefully to New Orleans. Kathy's on the board of Entrepreneurs Week, an Idea Village, where you're seeing certainly big ones like Austin, it's growing huge, where it's not just on the coast that things are happening, but if we're going to get out of this mess, it's going to be from the grassroots up, communities that have revived themselves.
So let me explain very briefly why Walter and I disagree on this. I think if you look at what we have gained as a result of embracing globalization and technology, what most people don't realize, and this is partly the master narrative of Donald Trump's rise, is that America has had a terrible 30 or 40 years. The data shows exactly the opposite. The United States and the Eurozone economy were in 2008 the same size. The American economy is now twice the size of the Eurozone economy. In 1990, in 2000, German wages and American wages were about the same. Today, American wages are 50% higher than German wages. Boris Johnson used to joke that he wanted, after Brexit, he wanted America to be so close to Britain that Britain would become the 51st state of America. Well, I hate to break it to him, but if Britain were to become the 51st state of America on a per capita basis, it would be the poorest state in America. Poorer than Mississippi, poorer than Alabama. And the same is true of France, and the same is true of Germany, and the same is true of Japan.
Are they really poorer?
Well, so that we have generated a lot more wealth. I would argue we have not redistributed that wealth correctly. Our biggest failing is I would much rather run an efficient modern economy. Remember, 80% of Americans work in services. 8% work in manufacturing. So what you're really doing is taxing the 80% to sustain, if I may say, your aesthetic fantasy of a country in which we still make stuff, right? But I think there are many more efficient ways.
We have Jim Farley at Ford coming real soon. I'd love you to have that discussion because they are making more and more stuff in America.
So let me tell you the Ford story. What have tariffs done right now? And Jim Farley could back this up. If you make a Rolls-Royce in Britain right now, the tariffs on it are lower than a Ford car that is made in what is essentially a North American chain. So 60% made in America, but 40% made in Mexico. Because the only way to make cars efficiently in America is to have a back and forth between Canada, the US, and Mexico. So you take advantage of the labor being cheaper in Mexico, energy being plentiful in Canada, the US can do the final assembly. That, you know, the best example, Larry Summers uses this, is you put tariffs on steel. You protect steel jobs. But for every job in steel, there are 50 jobs in industries that use steel, where their jobs are now threatened because the input has become...
Well, wait, I'm not trying to make an argument totally for tariffs. I'm trying to make an argument that when you say America has exploded in wealth in the past 40 years, wages, though, have pretty much stagnated.
It's been an unequal explosion.
The money has gone...
Yeah, and that's why I say my argument would be we should be using that wealth to help. Obama gave a great speech when the Korean trade deal happened. He said, you know, we always say that trade is good for everybody in aggregate, but it hurts some people specifically. And what we need to do is to put a lot of money behind and helping people who get left behind, and then we never do it. And it's, if you look at the... Every time we talk about those retraining apprentices, we never fund them. We never do it. It's hard and it's expensive. So I mean, I think we both agree that we need to do something. I actually think the Biden approach of essentially industrial policy was better, which is find strategic industries where you're willing to bear some of the costs. You know, we do it in housing, for example. The government provides low-interest loans, Fannie and Freddie, things like that. It's just, I think tariffs are a very blunt, crude instrument, and they have all these, they backfire in many of these ways.
Instead of debating tariffs, so let's go back to your broader point, which is we've had just this amazing great wealth over the past 30, 40 years, and somehow the people in America don't get it, that they're clueless, they're wrong. Maybe they know more than we do. Maybe they were left behind by some of this wealth that was created and generated mainly into profits that went to the financial sector, the meritocratic elite. Not just because we didn't do enough retraining truckers to be coders. That's never going to, be the solution. But it was because we didn't believe, as Professor Sandel would say, that the dignity of good jobs at good wages in America should be the point of the economy, not growth and the expansion of wealth being the point of the economy.
I get it. And the way I would put it is, so I went to some of these towns in Pennsylvania and in Ohio where, people seem to have been left behind. And to me, the story was fascinating. And it backs up your original point, which was, if you looked at these places, the factory had gone away, but most people were working, and they had, they were making roughly the same. The unemployment rate in the United States is the lowest it's been roughly in 50 years. So it's not like we have mass unemployment. What had gone away was the community. What had gone away was, so when they all worked for the same steel factory, they all went to church at the same time. They all went bowling together. They all didn't belong to the Kiwanis Club. They all went to the movie theater together. They went to the hardware store together. But the thing is that, yes, globalization is part of it, but the reason they don't go to the movie theater is because of Netflix, not because of China. The reason they don't go to the hardware store is because of Home Depot, not Mexico. The reason they, even something like bowling, there's been an explosion of online gaming that most, particularly young men, do. So some of it is technology, some of it is globalization, but what has gone away is that community, that sense of community. And I think that's very important to people. And that even if you're making the same amount, but your world disappears, the people you hung out with, the community you were in, I think you feel somewhat purposeless. And I mean, that's why you see these rises of loneliness and all this data. And, you know, again, I don't know what the solution to it. Now, I want to ask you about before, because I know we're running out of time. We've talked about the explosion of wealth, and you've seen this new elite, the technology elite, up close in a way that very few people have. My own sense is that they don't seem as civic-minded, as determined to give back and build these communities. I'm speaking in the aggregate. Obviously, there are lots of exceptions. But I think about what sustained the great museums and the great cultural institutions in New York and Boston. And, you know, and I look at San Francisco. It's the center of the biggest explosion of wealth in the history of humanity. And look around and tell me with what great new museums you find, what great, you know, what's your sense about it?
It's interesting. In the 1890s, we had a technological revolutions that were, I think, even greater than the ones we're seeing today. You had electricity all of a sudden. You had automobiles. You had electric lighting, light bulbs. Right. You had telephones,
cars,
telegraphs, trains. All this is happening, totally transforming the society. We did some smart things then. We decided, okay, we're going to, instead of doing job retraining in the Obama sense, it was like, no, we're going to make high school universal and free. Major changes that we did, which we haven't done for this revolution. You also had malefactors of great wealth who were as vilified as some of the tech bros are today, but they become the great philanthropists, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Fords, and I'll do it. All the libraries get built. So the question is, will the tech bros go through that? Bill Gates obviously has led the way. But why is it that the tech bro culture has been, in some ways, less community-oriented, much more, it's hard to figure out the philosophy there, but it's a little bit libertarian populism, if that can exist, a Peter Thiel, David Sachs type libertarian populism. And whether that can get back to being connected to what you said, and which I was trying to say, is that, yes, creating great wealth is a good thing, but creating community and the dignity of each individual and each of our neighbors, that's the real thing. And as Jim Barksdale said, always remember that the real thing is the real thing. And we haven't gotten there yet.
And I feel like one of the challenges to me when you have these periods of explosion of great wealth is wealth becomes the only measure of how important you are in society. Even I see in my life, because, you know, I came to America in 81, 82, so it was the beginning of what turned out to be the crazy Wall Street boom, which then led to the crazy tech boom, right? So it was still at a point at which there was an enormous amount of value and honor and respect given to a novelist, you know, or a poet, or you know, classical music conductors, you know, Karajan, Schulte. These were enormous figures. Norman Mailer. These are big people. You had a sense that their worth in society was somewhat higher. Now I feel like we have a very simple, narrow metric. How much do you make and what is your net worth? And you rank everyone on that metric. And I think that leads you to an impoverished society, to an impoverished sense of your opportunities, and it's no way to live.
I think that's exactly right, for which thank you. And I would bring it back to our original point to make that writ larger, which is not just do we define ourselves by how much money we make, but we define our society, our country, by its wealth growth. And you correctly pointed out that the wealth growth in our country in the past 40 years has far exceeded France, you know, others. But maybe we need other metrics too to say, what is an economy actually for? Yeah. And the more narrow definition is it's to create growth and wealth. A broader definition is, and this gets back to what Aspen was all about, to create a good society.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, you know, these happiness indexes, right? It's not an accident that Northern Europe, whether it's Finland or Denmark, always score really well. And I think it's particularly fascinating when you think about the fact that there are periods in the winter when there's like 17 hours of darkness.
Yes, right.
And these people are still happy, right? What's going on? And I think it is that they have found a way to disconnect money from happiness, in a way that if you live, a decent life there, making, the median income or a little bit more than that, you still have, you don't have anxiety about your health because that's taken care of. You don't have anxiety about education because that's taken care of. You have beautiful infrastructure. You have great public parks. And I think, maybe that's telling us something, that's really at the end of the day, that's what human beings want. We make it so that you have this extraordinary possibility for out-of-control success, but you can also have out-of-control failure. But isn't that the American way? We're much more ragged, unequal, and we've always been that way at some level.
But at the heart of the Aspen Institute, and we can wrap it up by bringing it back 75 years, was the concept of a compass in which we balanced our values, and in understanding through the executive seminar and the leadership programs, not just what's great for growth or wealth, whatever, but what is a good society and what is a good life. And I think one of the things I loved about this institute is it starts with Plato, and you go through that all the way through to the people who influenced our founders, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, Descartes. All are looking for something higher. What is truly the good society? What is truly the good life?
And the people who have those answers at the end of the day are the ones you really remember. I don't know who was the richest guy, who had the highest net worth around the time of Plato, but we remember Plato, not him. Walter Isaacson.
Fareed, thank you. The answer is Croesus.
So,
thank you.
So talk about the real right here, as Barksdale said, the real of Fareed Zakaria and Walter Isaacson. Again, thank them for that conversation. So my name is Graham Veazey. I'm the executive director and executive producer of the Aspen Ideas Festival. Thank you. And along with Jinhee Kim, the executive vice president for public programs, we're thrilled to be kicking this off. And I'm going to echo Dan. We're going to be here talking about relevant issues of the day, but our overarching theme was timeless questions. And so we've loved being able to collaborate with Fareed as the 2025 guest curator and his team, Tom Goldstone, who's his executive producer. And I want to start part of that celebration after that wonderful talk is the musical roots of this place. And so I want Derek Wang to come up on the stage. And we're looking back at the first keynote of that 1949 convening. And it was Albert Schweitzer, who came over to the U.S. on his only trip to the U.S. To come to that 1949 Goethe bicentennial. And Schweitzer was known both for his amazing medical innovation, but also for his love of Goethe, but his love of music. And he particularly loved Bach. And so Derek is a 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival Fellow. He's at Juilliard. This year, we're so thrilled to have our largest class of Aspen Ideas Festival Fellows in the history of this 21-year convening. And so Derek's going to play a song for us in tribute of Schweitzer, and then we have some more fun surprises for you in store.
If I may, very briefly, when Albert Schweitzer finally arrived in Aspen in 1949 after what was an arduous days-long journey, mostly by rail, he took a deep breath of this thin mountain air and said, "They've built Aspen a little too close to heaven." Perhaps you hear also a note of admonition in that phrase, a little too close. But the music of Bach, at least as I experience it, also takes us quite close to heaven. And if it is occasionally a steep climb, nevertheless, the rewards at the summit are worth it. And that was certainly true for Albert Schweitzer, who made Bach his life study. And I'll go further and claim that for me, experiencing the music of Bach in the context of Schweitzer's thought brings me closer to what he meant with that great motto of his, the reverence for life. Because in every work of Bach's, in particular a fugue such as the one I'm about to play, all of the productive collision that Bach sets his musical voices into emerges with something affirmative, the reverence for life being, in the end, a triumphant yes to life. Here is the jig from Bach's Fifth French Suite.
Everyone, Derek Wayne. Thank you so much, Derek. So when you think about 75 years ago, I always say we're kind of fraternal twins with the Aspen Music Festival and School, and we'll be on the 28th at the Klein Music Tent. So this is my 20th Aspen Ideas Festival. It's my 16th since meeting an Aspen Ideas Festival fellow when I was a young producer. Her name's Marika. We've now been married for 10 years. We have a 4-year-old, Ray, and then a 9-week-old son named Keizo. And so you never know who you're going to meet during this gathering. And when we talk about forging lifelong relationships, I can speak to it personally. So our team is amazing. I see a lot of them around the room. And I want all of you to know that we want you to be happy campers, like you were talking about, for the next few days. And so when you want an answer, think pink. Because anybody who's wearing a pink lanyard is here to make sure that you're maximizing your experience at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Tonight, we're going to hearken back to a long Aspen Institute tradition with the Theater of War. This is a troupe that has been getting sold-out shows throughout New York. We're going to have a staged reading at 7:30 tonight at Marble Garden of Ibsen's An Enemy of the People. So I encourage all of you, after this, we're going to have our opening reception, and then we're going to be doing, in the tradition of the Aspen Institute, drama and dialogue with A Poisoned Well. Also, part of the Aspen experience is what Walter talked about, which was the Aspen idea that was coined by Mortimer Adler and Walter Pepkin. I loved in that old nitrate film, you saw Pepka sitting on the ground while he'd given his seat to all the other participants as Schweitzer was lecturing. But tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. and each day of the festival, we've got great mind, body, spirit activities, whether it's bird watching or hikes up Maroon Bells or forest bathing or a guided 5K run. So check the app for the answers. And if you haven't downloaded it, do it. It's really important. The audience, all of you, participants, this is not a transactional thing where we have people on stage and they go to a green room. These are people who are coming and sharing their amazing ideas, but they want to learn from you. And so that's why in many of our sessions, we've got audience Q&A, and I want you to engage in walks across campus with the wide variety of folks that we have. So we have the fellows that I mentioned, that Derek's one of them. We've got over 200 from 40 states and 10 countries this year. And then we've got the great speakers that come from all over the world. We've got the Aspen Challenge folks that Dan had mentioned earlier. And what's interesting is they're finishing a year-long program that is enriching their communities. Another group is the Bezos Scholars that are starting a year-long. So to provide a little texture on how amazing this 21-year program is, I'd like to take a look at this short film.
One of the best parts of this festival is the array of curious, dynamic, high-striving young leaders. Bezos Scholars, are you here?
17 scholars, 13 educators, unlimited potential. The year-long Bezos Scholars Program begins with an immersive experience at the Aspen Ideas Festival.
I came to Aspen and I met 16 other amazing people who were my age, who were so passionate about creating positive impact in their communities.
After connecting with their cohort and other leaders at the festival, scholars work with their communities to develop a project that makes a lasting difference.
My community change project was creating an after-school program at my high school that was designed to provide academic support and a sense of belonging for STEM students.
I implemented a program to help prevent opioid and drug addiction amongst high school students.
We had our local festival in South Africa where we brought high school students into our campus to equip them with leadership and entrepreneurial skills.
Over the last 20 years, Bezos Scholars have launched hundreds of projects across the U.S. and South Africa, creating change at any scale.
The Bezos Scholars Program gave me, the confidence that I needed as a 17-year-old girl and that I could make a difference in the lives of others.
The Bezos Scholars Program is more than a leadership program.
It's a family. It's a space where you ignite your creativity.
I had a great glow up, didn't I? Good evening, everyone. My name is Mohammed Al-Faisal Khalid Al-Tigani Ahmed, and I'm proud to be from Khartoum, Sudan. I am a junior at Skidmore College in upstate New York, an African Leadership Academy alumni, a former Aspen Challenge intern, and a Bezos Scholar class of 2022, and currently interning with the incredible Aspen Society team. The Bezos Scholar Program has equipped us with the voice to advocate, the mind to think critically, and the confidence to conquer. I want to take a moment to thank Mike and Jackie Bezos, who have never treated us like just scholars, but like family. They constantly ensure we have everything we need to thrive and lead. Right now, my country, Sudan, is facing one of the largest humanitarian crises in modern history. Nearly 14 million people, including myself, have been displaced by conflict. But this is more than a crisis of numbers. It's a crisis of lives, of dignity, and of hope. The world must not look away. We need attention, support, and action now. Which brings me to someone who has never looked away, someone who leads with both heart and brilliance. It's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Imtithal Emi Mahmoud, a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, an Aspen Ideas Fellow, world champion poet, and one of BBC's 100 most inspirational women, a Yale graduate, award-winning activist, and global speaker. Emi has shared poetry everywhere from the United Nations to New York Fashion Week. Beyond poetry, Emi is the strategic director and community organizer of the IDP Humanitarian Network, an indigenous Sudanese-led crisis intervention network that coordinates and mobilizes life-saving resources, serving thousands of families across Sudan. Please join me in welcoming my fellow Sudanese, the extraordinary Emi Mahmoud, joined by the amazing pianist, Derek Wong.
Thank you so much, Momo, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for having us. My first understanding of humanitarianism came from my grandmother and my mother and my father and all that they instilled in me. They taught me that to make change is to go beyond asking for it. You have to fight for it. And that's what I'm thinking about as I stand here in front of you with all the crises that are happening in the world, including the largest crisis in Sudan. As a refugee and survivor of genocide, as a scientist, as an investor, all those different things, I'm not standing here with any of those hats today. Instead, I'm here to tell you, as a poet and as a human, that the problems we're facing today, when millions die every year, preventable deaths, year after year from structural violence, the same words are used as we use for a natural disaster, a crisis, an act of God, something inevitable. But the reality is that these problems are man-made. War is man-made. Climate change is man-made. The gender gap, the digital divide are man-made. Even the famine in Sudan are man-made. These are problems, and problems have solutions. And the only way we'll find those solutions is if we lead with our humanity. That's why, even though I wear different hats, I'm speaking as a poet, because I believe if you speak to somebody academically, they'll respond academically. If you speak to them politically, they'll respond politically. If you speak with hate, they'll respond with hate. But if you speak with your humanity, they're compelled to respond with their humanity. Now, I know Fareed said that we're not as respected anymore, us artists, but I hope we can change your mind and help people remember their humanity these days, because all of us have a role to play, and I hope that this poem called Lessons Learned will inspire you to lead with your humanity. I've lost more than 20 family members in the past 2 years, and that doesn't even count how many I've lost in Darfur, but I can stand here, be in community with you, because I feel hope in this moment, because I can feel our humanity. This poem is called Lessons Learned, and I look forward to hearing from you. In kindergarten, after they taught us to read and write, they told us we can change the world. Those three things have been linked in my mind ever since. They were right about reading, they were right about writing, but there are a few things they missed about changing the world. Sand under my toes, I hear the Antonov planes above the skies of Al-Fashir. They always came in pairs, stealing the sound from our throats, the time from our lives. Fearing the night isn't nearly as terrifying as fearing the day. They only hid behind the notion that no one would come for us, that no one would care. Do you know what it's like when your oppressors don't have to hide behind the cover of darkness? Well, this is the story of how everyone changes to care, and how people like us take back the light and use it to illuminate the books we read and write. When I was young, I would make memories with family members knowing they often could and would be the last. Most of my childhood was spent in a race against time that was stolen from us in many ways. That race has never ended. We work now to reverse the effects of decades of neglect, centuries of structural violence, the barbs of inequality, running fissures deep down into the earth. Every moment I take to catch my breath brings the fear of backwards momentum crashing down on me. As if taking a break suddenly gives the world permission to course correct toward violence, teetering on the edge. Every moment we're not actively choosing good, we're choosing something else. Here is what they missed about changing the world. It's never a question of whether you can change the world or not. Everyone changes the world every single day. But will you change it for the better, or will you change it for the worse? What will you choose? If we stop, who will carry on? If not us, then who? These questions ring through my mind in rooms just like this one. When loss is chronic, it doesn't numb or diminish. It resonates across borders, across contexts, across time, masking what is dying to be known. That there are real people here in these conversations, in these rooms. In the essays we write, in the books we publish, there are people. In the movements we champion, in the language of profit, of academia, of change, there are people echoing through the halls we study in the boardrooms we occupy, the investments we make, there are people resting in the empathies, the residue of empathy we scrape from the very bottoms of the barrels of apathy in this world. There are people hidden in the conversations that are had when countries are deciding what to do with our lives. There are lives here in the tense and clotted air, on the trails of jet fuel, on the wings of promise. There were days in Darfur where the isolation of language cut almost as deeply as the isolation of genocide. The darkest moment in our lives became a crisis. The uncle and aunt I cherish were called IDPs. The mother and father who kept me safe, refugees. The generations upon generations robbed of prosperity, casualties. I lost just as many family members in language of protocol, theories of conflict, theories of change, and the words would get louder and louder and wider and masking what is dying here in etiquette and predicate, etiquette and precedent. Then it dawned on me. I read a book in college once that said, and I quote, "Darfur has no valuable minerals, no famous sons or daughters, no natural monuments or wonders to attract any but the hardiest foreign visitors, and that news of Darfur seemed to come from a void." Well, I don't know what it means to be a woman speaking from a void, but I can and do answer them, because we are the answer. All of us here contained in this moment are the answer. The confluence of all of our empathy and dedication, the meeting of all of our minds. We break down the language, stop with the abstractions, root progress in humanity, change in fraternity, take back the light, and pave ahead a path full of promise, pulling the world back from its teetering edge. The future is impatient, and it will cave to the will of whoever gets there first. I want our collective good to get there first. I want us to get there first. I'm reminded of a meeting I had with my uncle one January in Paris. He said, "I know that you and your brothers and sisters and our family are all far away, scattered right now. But I like to think of us as constellations. I lay in my bed at night and stare at my ceiling, imagining the beacons of you all connected, no matter what. His words strengthen me as we work now to bring forth a future where the only thing that lights up the sky is us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So the final words in the program for 1949 was more light, and we just got it. So please now join us in the opening reception at the Dorhoesier Center. Happy festival. Welcome to the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival.